Hey guys, welcome back to the Pulling Curls podcast. Today we're talking about what Ray Romano terms when a playground turns into a juice bar. That's right, we're talking about breastfeeding. We're going to talk about problems breastfeeding because I am the poster child for breastfeeding problems. And we're going to talk a little bit about like how often it happens. And we're also going to answer the age-old question, does boob size equal production? Let's untangle it. Welcome to the Pulling Curls podcast. I'm Hillary, your curly-headed host on the podcast where we untangle everything from pregnancy, parenting, and home routines. I want you to know that there are no right answers for every family, and I find that simplifying my priorities is almost always the answer. It's tangled, just like my hair. This is the portion of the show where we beg you to write us a review. That's right, beg. We just need some more. I know you're super busy, but I really appreciate it. Okay, before I jump into introducing our guest, I wanted to remind you guys that I have an opt-in all about how to tell if breastfeeding isn't working, because that could be a specialty of mine. So definitely check that out in the show notes. You can download it. That way you can kind of have it close by when baby comes home. Okay, today's guest is one of my favorite people. This is her third time on the Pulling Curls podcast. She is the breastfeeding mama on Instagram and TikTok. She runs breastfeeding Facebook groups. She is just a wealth of information, and she now has on-demand breastfeeding classes. There are mini classes, guys, and if you're looking to troubleshoot something and other things too. So I'm so excited to have my friend on. I want to introduce you to my friend, Katie Clark. This episode of the Pulling Curls podcast is sponsored by the online prenatal class for couples. It simplifies understanding labor so you can have a more relaxed pregnancy and birth taught by a highly experienced labor and delivery nurse, and can be done wherever you are, whenever you want. No more arranging busy schedules to fit in a prenatal class. Save 15% with the coupon code UNTANGLED. You can find out more at pullingcurls.com in the menu under courses or in this episode's show notes. Hey, Katie, welcome to the Pulling Curls podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me again. I'm so excited.
Yeah, so today we want to just talk about the problems breastfeeding, because breastfeeding is beautiful and natural, and I firmly believe it is the best way to feed your baby. But so many people go into it thinking your baby's just going to suck on your boob like Maggie Simpson sucks on a bottle. And that's just not the way it goes.
No.
What percentage of women have like an actual physiological problem that prevents them from breastfeeding?
So there hasn't been a lot of studies done on this, which is unfortunate. But the estimates I found are between 0.01 and 5% have an actual problem that's going to make it difficult for them to produce enough breast milk. And there's, percentages above that, due to hormonal conditions or things like that. But a physiological issue like with their breast is a small percentage, but it is between 0.01 and 5%.
Yeah, so it's pretty rare. I also read that it is higher in wartime.
Interesting. I don't know about that, but I believe it.
Well, I mean, it makes sense because moms would be extremely stressed if they had a partner who was at war. That would make sense. But
for sure. Nope, I agree. That is interesting, though.
So interesting. So as a side note, backstory, I do not get enough breast milk, but I always wonder if I would end up being in that portion of people because I do pump for like 2 weeks and it never comes in. First baby, I tried longer and we tried drugs and stuff like that, but I don't know how they diagnose the physiological because they aren't going to like carve into my breasts and check to see my gland. So anyway, there you go.
Yeah, there are certain signs, just like tubular breast or your breast being too far apart or, the absence of breast growth during pregnancy. But like you said, it's not like they're not going to do an x-ray and an ultrasound to see what your breasts look like on the inside.
Yeah. So they did notice when I had like a full physical with a lactation lady, which is side note, fairly awkward. They did decide they were probably too far apart and possibly tubular. So, but I've seen a lot of boobs in my time and mine don't look all that different from other people. So
maybe there's just a small differences, but it really is. It's so hard to tell unless you have, the biggest sign is if you really didn't have very much breast growth during pregnancy or when you were, going through puberty or whatever, but it's a crapshoot. Like you can get exams before and I think that's great, but it can be hard just to look at you and say, well, you're not going to be able to breastfeed. Sorry.
Yeah. And I don't want people out there thinking that have small bosoms that they aren't going to be able to breastfeed or if they didn't get giant bosoms during pregnancy because that is not a prerequisite, and it doesn't mean that you would have any more or less breast milk than somebody else.
Yes. In this case, size does not matter with your breast size. It's all due to the mammary glands in your breast, which the size is more due to the fatty tissue.
Yeah. Okay. So, but how many women in general have problems breastfeeding?
So this is a lot higher, as you might guess. This was a study back in 2013 by UC Davis, but they found about 92% of new moms were having some kind of problem with breastfeeding. 44% said that it was because of pain. 40% said that they weren't producing enough breast milk. So they felt like they weren't enough. So those are the two top reasons why people felt they were having trouble with breastfeeding.
Yeah. So that obviously huge range. Cracked nipples, the baby won't latch, baby's tongue tied. It could be you, it could be the baby, it could be your boobs. So many options.
So many things. And it's so overwhelming, especially because you get advice from all over the place being like, oh no, the pain's fine. You just nurse through it. And other people tell you, no, your baby has a problem. And it can be really overwhelming.
Yeah. We even find that in the hospital because lactation has kind of our party line, but every nurse in the room kind of says things differently. And so it can be really confusing to new moms. And we understand that, but it's also hard to be a robot and remember exactly what lactation says. So
for sure. And I remember when my first was born, I was nursing my son fine, and the lactation person came in. She said, oh, you have flat nipples. You're probably going to have a problem nursing him. And I'm like, well, I'm not, but okay. So you just get all sorts of different, and I'm like, I don't even know what that means. Cause I was 22 when I had my first baby, and my sisters had breastfed, but it wasn't something I really thought about. And I didn't know what anyone was talking about.
Well, and most people haven't spent a lot of time looking at other people's nipples.
Yeah, I personally don't. I don't know. Maybe people do that at parties, but I sure don't.
Yeah. So it's hard to know what looks normal unless you're us. Like I literally chart about people's nipples. That's my job.
For sure.
So what are some signs that breastfeeding is not working?
So a biggest one is pain. I would say across the board, if there's pain, and I feel very strongly about this, that if you're feeling pain, there's usually something that you can do to fix that problem. And in some cases, moms will say, the pain went away after like 3 or 4 weeks. But in that situation, it's almost always because the baby's latch got better, or they just got better at nursing. But I'd say pain is a big sign. Slow weight gain or losing weight is a big sign that their baby might not be transferring correctly, or you might have a lower milk supply, and dehydration. So those are some of the biggest ones that, a sign that maybe breastfeeding isn't working. And that doesn't mean that you just have to throw in the towel and say, I'm done. It just means that you should probably evaluate things a little bit closer.
Yeah. So also, side note, sometimes you don't know weight gain because it's in those first couple of days. So you wouldn't be heading to the doctor.
For sure.
Although you can buy a scale, and newborn scales are not that inexpensive, and it would be a great thing to loan out to friends.
Yeah, I think they're great to have. And obviously you shouldn't get too obsessed with it. The lactation consultants I work with always say don't weigh more than once a week usually, because baby's weight gain can be like 2 ounces one day and half an ounce the next day. So you can easily get obsessed with it. But I personally use scales and I love them.
Yeah, I think it's just really reassuring to do. So how you would do it is you would weigh the baby without a diaper, then feed, and then weigh the baby again without a diaper. And you're just seeing how much baby's brought in.
You actually would weigh them with the diaper on just in case they pee, because it's
that's a good point.
With a weighted feed. Yeah.
But you would start with a clean diaper.
Yeah,
that's what I should say. Yeah, you want a same diaper.
Yep. Clean diaper. You don't want to change anything. So if they have a blanket on when you weigh them, which you probably shouldn't, but if they have a blanket or clothes on, make sure it's just the same going back and forth, and you can kind of see what it is. And working with a lactation consultant would probably be the best way to do that, and they can show you how. But for me, it gave me a lot of peace of mind, especially because I had some babies that had weight gain problems in the beginning, and going into the doctor for weighing things gave me major anxiety. So it was helpful. And they said I was okay to do that as long as I knew what I was looking for. But I don't know. I think scales are very helpful.
Yeah. I just like data. You know me. I love me some data.
No, I agree. And I think, I don't know, I get some criticism from people saying, oh, don't tell moms to use scales. That's just telling them not to trust themselves. But I'm a big believer that if something is going to help you breastfeed longer, then it's probably not going to hurt you. Because there's a lot of moms that will just stop breastfeeding because they don't think their baby's getting enough.
Yeah, it's just not the same as a bottle where you can see them down at.
Yeah, there's no ounce markers on your breast.
Yeah. Some things you can watch for is milk on the sides of their mouth or inside their mouth, although babies' mouths look kind of white anyway. So a lot of people think, is that milk or is it mouth? The longer you've been around your baby, the more you'd be able to tell something like that. But
yeah. Or if they're swallowing
sounds, which can be really hard to tell because they're not like gulping like we do. So I always listen for a sound like the letter C, and you can also watch their Adam's apple move.
Yeah, it's like a suck, swallow, and just like seeing, like, they should just, I don't know, it's hard. And you can ask, when you're in the hospital, ask questions, because the nurses or lactation people can help you look for what is normal and what's not. But if you hear like clicking or the baby kind of slurping, that means that they don't have a great latch too. So they might not be transferring milk well. But generally swallowing is a good sign, and acting content after they're done eating.
Yeah. Screaming baby all the time, not a good sign.
No.
But also not always a sign of breastfeeding issues.
That's the thing. Babies do weird things. And a lot of times it's easy to say, oh, it's because they're breastfeeding that they're having a problem. And sometimes that is the problem, but it's not always, you have to look at the whole baby and the whole picture to see what's going on.
Yeah. So what should a mom do if she thinks something's wrong?
She should call an IBCLC, which is an international board certified lactation consultant. They are, the gold standard in lactation. There's lots of different lactation people out there. I'm a certified lactation educator, which means I can teach people, and help them with basic problems. But the IBCLC can actually do, physical exams and evaluate your baby's mouth and your breasts and do the weighted feeds and just give you a full exam. And they are definitely the experts. You can call your pediatrician, but in my experience, they don't always have the best advice, because they can't be experts in everything, and breastfeeding kind of falls to the bottom for a lot of them. So if you can, see an IBCLC.
Yeah, you could definitely call your pediatrician to try and find an IBCLC. I will say in the hospital, the people that are on lactation are all IBCLC.
Yeah.
Or are getting their IBCLC, I should say, because some nurses are transitioning into lactation and it takes a year-ish to get your IBCLC.
Yeah.
So, and there are also, so you can find them in the hospital. You can find freestanding. I have a friend here in Phoenix who has a lactation clinic just of her own. Mm-hmm. So they're all over the place. They're not hidden.
Yeah. And you can go to support groups. Like there's La Leche Leagues. I think just finding a resource that's going to have breastfeeding information, like going to, Susie next door and saying, I don't know what's going on. She could probably give you some tips or whatever, but it's best for you to go to a professional if you're having problems with breastfeeding and you want to fix those problems.
Yeah. And the good news is that insurance covers most of those visits now.
Yep. It's awesome. In my hospital, when I gave birth, they had a lactation clinic that was available like 3 times a week for free up to 8 weeks. So talk to your hospital and see if they have something available like that. Not all do, but it can be a useful resource.
Yeah. And a lot of times it's in all those papers that you brought home.
Yeah.
We have one that we stick inside there, and there's just so much information in the hospital. But most hospitals do have a newborn, like a mom's group, where it is usually led by lactation because they're nicer than the labor nurses.
I have found that most IBCLCs, most of them are wonderful. Some of them, you'll find this with every profession. Some of them get a little militant with, just different things. And everyone gets that way when they're passionate about things. So if you don't feel comfortable with one, if you feel like they're kind of trying to make you do something you don't want to do, you can always find a new one. But in my experience, most of them are very kind and wanting to help you.
In general, they are postpartum nurses who just have a passion for breastfeeding and want to spend more time doing that.
Yeah.
I have to admit that is not the route I want to be on in my life. I do not have a passion for it.
And that's understandable.
Okay, so is there anything you think moms can do ahead of time to prepare for possible issues or to mitigate any issues?
The biggest thing is for prevention is just education. Because I think a lot of moms, they don't know what to look for. They don't know what's normal with a breastfed baby. They see their baby cluster feeding and they're like, why does my baby want to nurse? I just nursed him like 10 minutes ago. And so understanding what is normal cluster feeding versus, my baby actually isn't getting enough. So just education. So taking a class is really important. Getting information from good sources. There's a lot of bad information out there. So be careful where you get your sources, but just, I don't know. The biggest thing is really education and making sure you're taking a class that goes over everything. Because I know a lot of moms I talk to, they're like, I took a breastfeeding class and basically they told me, this is how you position a baby, feed them, and, you're good to go. And that's how my breastfeeding class was. I had the nurse tell me, if I sent my kid to the nursery, then I would never learn his feeding cues and then we would not breastfeed. And that was basically all I remembered from that class. So taking a class that goes over the basics, but also shows you what normal infant behavior is and what to look for in case something's going wrong.
Yeah. Mine was just like, breastfeeding will be unicorns and rainbows.
Yeah.
You are so lucky that you have breasts.
Yep. That's a huge, and we all, have revisionist history, but I feel like that's what so many moms tell me. They're like, my class never told me that, it could hurt. Cause I had someone, they're like, it'll never hurt. It won't hurt. And I'm like, okay, but then sometimes it does and you don't know what to do and you feel like you did something wrong. And most of the time it's not something you're doing wrong. It's because these babies they're tricky. They have their own little personalities and it can be hard to figure out how to feed them, especially if you're you're not given a lot of guidance. So just finding, those classes and even searching out like an IBCLC that has good recommendations before you give birth can be really helpful. With my last, I didn't have an IBCLC and I should have known better to look for one, but we had problems. And so I had to, search really quickly to find one and find someone that could actually see me within, a couple of days. And it was really stressful after you have a baby to try and figure out who to contact. So knowing who to contact before you give birth can be really helpful.
Yeah. And talking to friends about somebody that they liked, because I will agree that there are some that I don't like as much.
Yeah. And I think you could get a physical exam like we talked about. You can't necessarily look at your breasts and say, well, that's wrong. But if you work with an IBCLC, and this isn't super common, but you can be like, do my breasts, that might sound a little weird, but you can ask them, do my breasts look like they have any problem, anything wrong that could prevent me from breastfeeding? Or you can go over your own medical histories. Like women with PCOS, they sometimes have harder time producing enough breast milk. And so knowing that beforehand might help you, figure out what you're going to do once your baby's born. You might, pump extra or hand express milk, things like that. So just kind of going over your own health history with your OB or your IBCLC can be helpful.
Yeah. And women who are having babies now, a lot of our moms use formula, or they just definitely were not open about breastfeeding. I remember when I went to nursing school and had my first breastfeeding information, I was like, what? I was like, it was just like a whole world I had never even thought about. I think I thought babies came out and ate Cheerios.
Well, yeah, I remember my sister when I was 24 or 25 weeks with my first, she was just like, so are you going to breastfeed? And I was like, I don't know. I guess so. It wasn't something I thought about. And I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize that, I don't know. I think it's just, you're thinking about so many things when you're pregnant that, there's going to be some people that, they've dreamt of breastfeeding their whole lives. But I mean, my mom breastfed. I remember her breastfeeding my little brother. But it wasn't something we, talked about all the time. And I, grew up dreaming that I was going to breastfeed my children. But I think it's hard because you don't know, a lot of times. But I think if you can, education is important and just having realistic expectations, because I think if you realize it could look differently than you expect is really important, because every journey looks different. Every baby's going to be different. And I feel really strongly about helping moms find what works for them, because it is a commitment and it takes time, and you really have to, I don't know, you just have to have the realistic expectations. And if a mom comes to me and she's like, I really want to breastfeed and I'm having problems, I'm not going to be the one that's like, well, you gave it a good try, just do bottles. Because, that can be the answer. But if she wants to breastfeed, then I'll help give her the resources she needs to find out if that's possible. Because I think every mom just needs to be able to make educated decisions.
Yeah, for sure. And Katie has a breastfeeding class now. Back in the day, I thought in-person breastfeeding classes were the best, but I love the idea of a breastfeeding class online, because you can watch it ahead of time and then you could flip through it in the hospital to get any awesome questions answered. But also when you go home, you have it that whole time. So I actually think that online is better than in person, because you could just come out with unicorns and rainbows like I did from mine.
It's true. And that's the thing. That's why I created my online classes, because I felt like there's only so much that it can teach you in 45 minutes, and in-person support is awesome. But like you said, sometimes it's just nice to have that information to reference later. Oh, I'm in pain. What did the IBCLC, instead of having to call her up or text her or whatever, you can be like, oh, well, there's that section, in Katie's class where it talks all about the reasons why I might be in pain and what to do. So I mean, I'm biased, but I do think an online course is awesome. And we've really tried hard to make it comprehensive for moms. So they, I was kind of hesitant because I'm like, I don't want to scare moms away, so I try to be positive, but I also want, people to have those resources. That's what I just think is so important, is giving moms resources to make decisions. And sometimes it doesn't work. And sometimes you're like, I don't want to breastfeed. And I talk about that. I'm like, that's okay. You might go into having your baby and think, I don't know what I'm going to do. But just knowing the basics is going to make a big difference. And you can make the decision that you feel best about and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't feel guilty either way.
And I think it's so important. That's just what all of this whole labor and everything is. It's just giving you the tools to make the best decision at the moment of time. Because even though you make a decision now, if you get home and whatever isn't working, then you can make a better decision then,
Yep. Nope. I agree. And I think that's the biggest thing. No guilt, just making this, because a lot of moms I talk to just feel, they're like, I feel so bad. They'll come to me and say, I'm on my second baby. I feel so bad because I stopped breastfeeding my second at 2 months and I just want to do it different now. And I think that's awesome. And that because they recognize that, that they weren't given, the right information or whatever, or they just didn't know where to turn. So I think just educating yourself is so important.
Yeah. Well, I still have mild amount of guilt for not breastfeeding. But
well, you fed him. He's alive still. So
I have made so many worse choices since then, though. So, whatever.
No, I think it's true. You've said this before, how you feed your baby isn't going to be the worst decision or best or worst decision you make. Some people might disagree with that. They might think that, breastfeeding your child made the biggest difference in their child's life forever. But
I don't think those people have had a teenager.
I don't think so.
No teenagers in that house.
That is probably true.
All right. Thanks for coming on, Katie. If you guys have any questions or you want to take our course, I'm going to have the link in the show notes. This is episode 53. So go to pullingcurls.com. Podcast is in the menu. Click on that. And then this is the breastfeeding episode number 53 with Katie Clark.
Yeah.
Thanks, Katie.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, guys, I love this episode because I have to say, I was a nurse. I was a first-time mom. I had a screaming baby and I just couldn't figure it out. And then I realized I hadn't changed a diaper and maybe I was starving him because it happens. And I think we act like it never happens. And even if you don't have like a breastfeeding production problem, it's just good to know signs of that it's working because that, really builds confidence that you can parent this child, right? And I have to say, most often it really does work. It is unlikely that really breastfeeding won't work physiologically for you, but it is possible that breastfeeding won't work for you just in your lifestyle. And that's fair too. Keep in mind, breastfeeding does take work on your side. It takes work on the baby's side. So there is some good effort that needs to be put in on both sides. I definitely want to thank Katie for coming on the podcast. Be sure and check out those on-demand breastfeeding classes. They're super reasonably priced. I think you guys will really like them. I'll have all of it in the show notes. This is episode 53 on the Pulling Curls podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope we helped smooth out a few of the snarls in your life. We drop an episode every Monday, and we always appreciate it when you guys share and review. Until next time, we hope you have a tangle-free day.